Welcome to this first video when we're going to be looking at the introduction to international trade. You know, we've been working our way through the circular flow of income over the last few weeks, and we're now looking at the last area on it, which concerns imports and exports. So we think about trading internationally, and the first question we have to ask is, well, why do we trade? I mean, there's a whole variety of trading theories which suggests that countries can benefit from trading with each other. We're a case of thinking, well, what can they benefit? How can they benefit? What benefits are? But generally all these benefits actually end up by saying that they'll be better off by trading than they are if they weren't trading. So if we think about this in terms of international trade, we need to think of terms like absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and that's what we'll begin by having a look at. So we'll start by looking at the absolute advantage, and countries or perhaps economic sectors in countries can have a absolute advantage over other countries if you can actually produce your product, or you can produce your service more cheaply than other countries. And you might think about things like farming or car manufacture or perhaps high-tech industries. It is perhaps an old way of thinking about trade, and as you see on the sheet here, I refer to Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, and that's something we talked about him last week. And he actually considered Portugal and wine and England as wool. And if we think about Portugal and wine, for example, it could be argued that Portugal have an absolute advantage over some other countries because Portugal has got a beautiful warm climate and it therefore produces good grapes and produces good wine. So it has an absolute advantage. England and wool, well, England's strength at that time, and we're going back into about 1776 I think, that had a real strength in wool and textiles, and actually we led the world, and there was an absolute advantage in terms of the production of wool, and therefore it made sense to concentrate as a country on wool production and then concentrate on trading for other items where we don't have an advantage. So for example, we could trade wool in exchange for Portuguese wine. So the question is, what actually might lead a country to have a comparative advantage in an economy? And I've got here Porter's diamond model, and you probably will remember Porter from when we considered him previously in his forces. So if we look at this model, there's 4 factors identified for generating competitive advantage between one country and another country in a particular sector of the economy. So if we look at the top and we think the firm's strategy, the structure and the rivalry. And if we think about the structure of a particular sector in a country, and we might actually think, well, how much rivalry is actually there in this sector within this particular country? Because if there's quite a lot of rivalry, a lot of firms in this country in competition with each other, then forces then behave in quite a lean way, and they're perhaps more enterprising, make more efficient use of their resources, and therefore they're much more likely to be competitive globally. So for example, if we think about white goods we tend to think of in terms of like kitchen goods, electrical goods, perhaps made in China. They may be very competitive and efficient at producing this in China, and it therefore means that they could actually be quite good at doing this globally. If they can achieve real efficiency in the domestic arena, then it will actually affect their global efficiency. If we think about the domestic demand conditions, if there's more demand domestically for innovation and performance, then it's more likely to actually see they're going to be more competitive globally. So for example, if we think of, say, the US film industry, it's aimed very much at the US market. This market is very demanding. They demand good quality films, they want to be entertained, they want lots of specifics and special effects in this film. So it actually makes these film organisations, these companies, actually quite competitive globally. The US demand from the audience means that the UCS leads the global area on this. If we think about the related and supporting industries, and some sectors require others to help them, perhaps the cost for a car manufacturer, you actually need firms to produce things like design work, drills, process work. So if in an economy there's supporting industries who can help each other, it's more likely to perform more efficiently than a company which is isolated. So it really sets a country up to perform well with the other countries. And then we consider the country factor endowments, the nature of the country. And some countries are much better endowed than others. There might be more coal, there might be more iron, more gas, access to bigger reserves, perhaps a bigger population to access more labour. Something about the countries being more competitive, perhaps having these raw materials. So I think we can see that there's always ways of competing in different ways in different countries. So quality price and price competition can depend on factor endowments, perhaps having a highly skilled workforce, perhaps particularly if we're thinking about industries like pharmaceuticals or the insurance interest. The competitively domestic market, more likely to be competitive abroad. And then you think about the things which are related to it, the after sales, service support, perhaps IT with after sales, the complementary industries, everything that comes out of it. So in the next video we'll actually continue looking at this comparative advantage.